So you're building an EVH replica, you're building a Frankenstrat, and you need a pickup, and you're thinking, geez, I wish I could just wind my own so I wouldn't have to go out and buy one. Well, that's what I'm going to teach you how to do right here. And what I'm going to show you here is the formula that you can use for almost any pickup on the market, as long as they tell you what the specs are. You can pretty much get really close to that particular pickup. So I'm going to be making a Frankenstrat pickup for my Ibanez because I can't stand the other pickup that it came with stock. It's just I can't take it anymore. So I'm going to end up making this pickup and then putting that in the Ibanez, or maybe I'll just build a new guitar that is specifically for my EVH music, for my Van Halen stuff. So what are you going to need? A compass. Believe it or not, you're going to need a compass. This helps us know what polarization the magnet is. Okay, it's going to, trust me, it's a good idea to have a compass. You're going to need some cloth electrical tape. You can get this at places like Stewart McDonald. This goes around the outside. You're going to need a couple of bobbins, one for the slug side, one for the adjustable screw side. But if you want, you can just go 2 of these if you wanted, or you can do 2 slug sides. It's really up to you. This way is just a little bit more standard. Now this particular pickup, by the way, I'm making is 53 millimeters, which basically means it's made for a Floyd Rose or a Fender. His actual pickup is a PAF size, so we're going to be dealing with that. It's closer to 50 millimeter, the 49.8 or something, 49.2 millimeter plate and bobbins, and they're tilted at an angle. So if you're trying to be 100% exact, do not use the 53 millimeter, do the 52. I'm sorry, do the 50 millimeter, don't do the 53 millimeter. I'm making it to fit into an Ibanez, and I'm not going to be tilting it, so I'm going to keep it as F-spaced. But at the same time, like I said, I might end up making another guitar instead. So we'll see. You're going to need an Alnico 2 magnet. And the Alnico 2 magnets, a lot of these things, even if they say they come charged, you're going to end up having to probably recharge it anyway. So I'll show you how to charge that. You're going to need a spacer. The very old PAFs and stuff like that, they used to use a strip of maple. So if you don't have a plastic one, that's fine. Doesn't really make that big of a difference. You're going to need a spacer for the screw side. Okay, for these guys over here, you're going to need a spacer as well. All of this stuff you can get at places like Stewart McDonald or online at other luthier supply companies. You're going to need some type of adjustment screw. I typically use black and gold on the majority of my pickups, just so people can recognize that they're mine. And then you're going to need some type of slug, whatever color you want, whatever material you want. Most of the time the materials are the same, so you don't really have to worry about it as far as that. There are some that are really cheap, and it can alter the pickup's performance, but the majority of them, if you get one, it's pretty much the same stuff. You're going to need some 4-conductor wire. Okay, 12 inches, 16 inches should be enough. This is the big thing. You're going to need some kind of coil wire. In this, I'm going to be using 43. Now, the reason why I'm going to be using 43 is a very simple reason. How much wire can you put on a bobbin? Okay, 42 gauge is typically what is used in the majority of pickups. 42 gauge. Problem is it's really hard to get any more than maybe about 10K DC resistance on a pickup bobbin. It's just really hard. Now when I say 10K, I'm talking like 5K here, like 5K here. It's hard to do that because it starts actually wanting to come off the bobbin. It sticks out too much. So if you hear that a pickup has more than 10K, chances are, and quite honestly, a lot of times it's like somewhere around the 9.5, depending on who's winding it. Chances are they are using 43 if it's more than that, because this is thinner and you can put more on there. According to the specs online, it says it's 14 point like 14 or 14.4. I wrote it down somewhere. DC resistance, which means it's going to be like 7 point something on this side, 7 point something on this side, and it says it's a degaussed Alnico 2. And degaussed Alnico 2 just means they fully charged it, and what they did is they took some of the charge out. And Alnico magnets over a period of time do lose their charge. So if they were trying to match his pickup exactly, that's why they did it. They measured the Gauss reading, and then they said, okay, well, in order for us to get this, we're going to have to, charge it to this, not fully. So in other words, it's slightly dead. Not completely dead, but slightly dead. And you're going to need some type of screws to attach the bobbins to the base plate. Something to keep in mind, base plate material is important because it modifies the eddy currents. They usually come in brass or some type of nickel or something like that. So it's good to, whatever you're trying to match, it's good to go ahead and try to use the same thing. Typically, brass gives it a slightly warmer, very slight, it's very, very slight, warmer thing because of the eddy currents, where the nickel, on the other hand, doesn't. So DiMarzio, if you're trying to copy a DiMarzio pickup or something, they use brass, so make sure that you stick to what you're trying to copy as close as you can, and you're going to get a pickup that's much closer to what you're looking for. So with all that being said, the 43 gauge wire, how many turns does it take? Well, that's a good question, and the way that you do that is you take a piece of the wire here, you measure it about 3 feet, and then you go ahead and you measure the DC resistance at the end of this wire, and then that's going to tell you what the resistance is per 3 foot. But if you divide that by 3, that tells you per foot. Then you take some of the wire and you wrap it around the bobbin a few times, maybe 5 or 10 times. Then you unwind it and measure measure how long that is, and then you can go ahead and divide the two. Because if you know, like, well, if I can wrap this thing, if I have 1 foot of wire and I can wrap it around this thing 10 times, then a foot of this wire right here is like so many ohms. I can just kind of go ahead, multiply, divide, do all that other stuff, and you can figure out exactly what you need per wire, per bobbin size. And then that way it tells you exactly how many turns. So what I've got here is, let's say it's 14.14K, right? So if we're going to do that, we have to times this by 1,000 because it's K, right? So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and divide this by how many ohms it is per turn on the with the particular gauge wire that I'm doing, and that's what I ended up getting. So this is the total turns, but we have 2 bobbins, so we have to divide that by 2. So what I have to do is 7,114 turns per bobbin. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be going for. Give or take a few turns, not going to make a big difference, but that's ultimately what we're looking for. Okay, now as far as the bobbins go, I don't know if you can see that, how there's that little bit of a burr on the inside edge. You need to take a razor and take those burrs off if you can find them. A lot of these things, the way that they're made, like that burr, not so much on that side, but you need to take those off, because if not, it can screw up your wires. And then what I'm going to do, as soon as I take that burr off, I'm going to put some double stick tape on my pickup tuner, and I'm going to put not a pickup tuner, pickup winder, and from there what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a lead wire. I'm going to fish this through this particular thin wire. I'm going to fish it through one of those little gaps inside there, like right there, one of those gaps. I'm going to feed it through, and I'm going to put a lead wire on it, and I'm going to put 1 drop of super glue, so that way it doesn't come loose, because there's nothing worse than winding an entire pickup and then that comes loose, because if it comes loose, it forces you to cut all the wire out and start over, and it's a waste of wire. So as soon as that's done and it's set up, I'm going to show you real quick. I'm not going to show you me actually winding it, because it takes a long time, and winding is pretty self-explanatory, and then afterwards I'll show you how we end up finishing all this stuff up. One thing that I want to talk about real quick before I actually start doing this, I took the burr off, and it has to do with your lead wire. And your lead wire is the one that you start with. And some people, they won't put a lead wire on until after they're done winding it. So they'll route it through the pickup, and in these spaces they'll let a little bit hang over, and they'll tape it down or something. They'll wind the pickup, and then they'll put their lead wires on both sides. I used to do that, but one of the problems that I was having was the lead wire, the first one that you're starting, a lot of times would break or something along those lines, or when you were soldering it, the soldering iron might just be too hot for just 1 second, and the next thing you know, you can't get to that lead wire anymore. So it's kind of like a ruined bobbin. So that's why now what I do is I actually attach a very, very thin, like this, a very thin lead wire onto it, and I have it protrude out, put a drop of super glue. That way I know this guy is not ever coming out, and it's always secure, and I don't ever have to worry about it again. So right here I've got the lead wire in. I put a couple of spins around it to make sure that this, when it starts rotating, it doesn't break. And I keep this stripped so that way after I'm done I can do a DC resistance and make sure that I don't have to put a few more winds on it or something, because you can actually just strip just a little bit of the varnish away when you get real close to the measurement, and then you just kind of put it right there on the stripped away varnish, so that way you don't have to break the wire and then solder another piece on or whatever. You can kind of just do it a little bit like that. So I'm going to be doing both bobbins. I'm going to be winding in a clockwise fashion. Okay, so the first one has been wound. This tape right here is a tape that you can get. It's a pickup tape. You can get it at places like StewMac and whatnot. I went ahead and I attached the other lead wire, and I tested the resistance of this. And this is actually just a little bit more than I wanted. It's not much, but it's a few ohms more than I wanted. So that tells me on the next one I need to make sure that I actually underwind it a little bit to compensate for this one, as well as making sure I don't make this too hot. It's still going to be in the low 14 range. I just want it to be more accurate. Also keep in mind, as soon as you pot these, it changes. The resistance is going to change. So as soon as I'm done with the other bobbin, we can go ahead and put this together, and then we can wax pot it, and then we can test it out. Okay, so I went ahead and I wound both of these, and I've measured the DC resistance, and it's a little higher than I wanted it to be, and that's to me that's fine, because it's not that big of a difference. As well as soon as you end up potting this, the resistance is going to change anyway. But this is going to be probably just a hair hotter than what the specs are online, and the specs are 14.4. That's what I saw as far as DC resistance. Now there is a big question when it comes to these types of things, and that is, typically we have it even, so it'd be like 7.7, right, for 14, but you can go like 8.6, right? And by doing stuff like that, you can get some interesting dynamics out of a pickup. So it's not unheard of, but I'm assuming that, that it's kind of rare that happens. So I'm assuming that it's even on both sides. This is probably going to end up being closer to 7.5, 7.6. I mean, I'm sorry, 14.5, 14.6, which is a little bit heavier than that. Which is fine. I'm not completely sweating it. It's close enough. Now, if you've never installed slugs before, you're going to see that on this there's a beveled edge right there, and then there's a flat edge. The beveled edge goes up like this from underneath, and then you just tap these in with a small hammer. That's how you put those in. And as far as the screws go, you just end up turning it over, putting your screws in and tighten them down as far as you need to go. These can sometimes be a bitch. Sometimes they do not want to cooperate with the screw. Okay, so I've got the slugs and the screws in. Everything's ready to roll. Now what I need to do is I'm going to put this guy together. It's important to note, I use my lead wires, I use black on black. Some people will do black and white just to let them know which one's the start and which one's the end. I know which one's the start and which one is the end just by the location. This is the start, that is the end. This is the start, that is the end. So there's no need for me to really do that. Also, I kind of like confusing people that try to take my shit apart. So the way that this works is like this. You end up putting your slug piece in. Like we can go, it doesn't really make a difference what side you use. This is where you're going to route your 4-wire through. But this little shim right there goes on the side of your slug side. Then from here we end up having the magnet. Now before I put this in, I'm going to show you how you can tell which side's which. The next side, in other words the side that's got the screws, is the south side, and this is where the compass comes into play. I'll show you that in a second. But this goes in here. Try and do this with one hand. This sits next to that along these lines, and then this would end up sitting inside that. So as soon as I have all this inside there, and I have the magnet polarized and charged and everything like that, I'll put it in. But let me show you real quick how you do this. To charge your magnet, I showed it in how to wind pickups. So actually, I'm not even going to bother doing that again. Just go to my video on how to wind a set of pickups, like a custom set of pickups. I show how to charge a magnet. You do the exact same thing with this guy, but which side's north, which side is south. And what you do is you come up with your compass, and your compass, when you put it here, it's going to tell you. You'll see this and you're going to go, oh, that's south. No, no, no. Opposites attract. This is north. This is south. And then if we flip it, we should get a flip of that too as well, and we do. So that tells us which side is which. This side is north, that side is south. I'm going to charge this guy up, and as soon as I'm done charging it, I'm going to install all this stuff just like I said. And just remember, this is the south side. Okay. I figured I'd go ahead and show you this anyway, just because there is a couple of differences. You're charging the sides of the magnet, not the big side. So what I do is I put it on a block, and then I have it dead center, and I have my piece of double stick tape on there. And then from here, I run it through the two magnets. This keeps it at a distance, so that way they are exact, right? Because if you just kind of hold it and go through, it wobbles and it doesn't work real well. This keeps it more exact. Afterwards, you can just pop this up. So remember, you're charging the sides of this magnet, not this side. You're charging this side and this side. So when you're running it through the magnets, keep that in mind. So I've installed the magnet. I've installed the slug side. I've got the screw side inside there, but the magnet will hold that in. I've got the shim in it. So now what I'm going to do is, this side has not been screwed in yet underneath with those other two breath screws, like from here and here. And then that way, after I'm done soldering the 4-lead wire, I can tuck it up and under and then lead it out of this hole. Now, when it comes to soldering the wires, okay, something to keep in mind. DiMarzio has a different wiring scheme than Seymour Duncan, and if you go to some other manufacturers, they're going to have their own. So it doesn't really make a difference on how you do it. Just make sure that you remember, you'll know which one is start, which one is end. Start and end, okay? That's the most important thing to remember. And then from there, as soon as I'm done soldering the 4-lead wire on this, I'm going to tuck it underneath here. I'm going to make sure that I put some electrical tape on it so this does not short out anywhere. I'm going to tuck it up and under and through there. And make sure that we also need, with the 4-lead wire, there's going to be a ground in it as well. And we want to solder the ground to this base plate. Okay, so now I've got everything soldered up. I put my piece of pickup tape around the outside of it. This has been routed through. I'm not worried about this right here. It's okay if you have a little bit hanging out and whatnot, but this needs to be grounded. You can see that it's been soldered. Before you wax anything, before you pot them, make sure that you don't have any grounds. In other words, you put your lead up here and you put one to ground. Make sure you don't have anything like that. Make sure that you have good connectivity. You don't want to wax pot this and then find out that there's something that is touching, or there's something inside there that isn't working anymore. So you need to make sure of that. Also, make sure that when you're running your wire up and underneath the screw side, no wires get underneath that plate, because if it gets underneath there, and so when you tighten this, a lot of times it'll short out. So be really, really careful about your wiring and stuff like that. So at this point, I can go ahead and I can pot the pickup. And you can, if you want to know about potting pickups, just go to my my video that is called How to Make Your Own Custom Set of Pickups. And it shows you how to do all that stuff. At this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my measurements, I'm going to take my readings, and I'm going to write down the day that I did this, the readings, and I'm going to sign my name to it. Okay, so here it is in all its glory, and what I've done is I've soldered one negative to the positive in the order that should be, and then I've also soldered the negative to the negative, right, which is the ground really. So that tells me that all I have to do is just hook up this to the hot, hook this guy up to ground, tape this guy off, and we're golden. Okay, so I've got this hooked up, and you'll see right here 14.57. So I'm a little high on this one, and that, you know, that's okay. Is it going to be a huge difference in the sound? Not really. It's going to be a little bit more low, but not much. And when I first did this, before it was potted, the resistance was actually a little higher. Okay, but like I said, I've had it sometimes where I've potted it and the resistance has increased. So all you can do, the best, you know, all you can do is just hope for the best. Get as close as you can to the number that you want. It's going to change a little bit through some experimentation. You'll know, depending on each wind that you do, if it's always going to be low or if it's always going to be high, etc. A lot of that has to do with not only the type of wire that you're using, but it has to do with the type of wax mixing that you're doing. There's a lot of factors that change that. But I'm fine with the 14.5. Listed it's 14.4. That's pretty close. It's pretty close. So anything else that I need to, oh, as soon as you take this out, and I'm going to do a video on this eventually about things that people don't know about pickups. But as soon as you take this out of the wax, until it comes to room temperature, the DC resistance is going to be through the roof. Like this one, when I first took it out, it was like around 15 something, and like maybe like 15 and a half, almost 16. But that's normal because when things get hot, they expand. So don't freak out. Wait till it gets to room temperature. After it gets to room temperature, then measure it, and expect to see a difference after you pot it. Okay, that is completely normal. So the next thing is basically just throw this in the guitar, and let's see what it sounds like.